provinces of the same party at war with each other, playing to their own bases, and a Prime Minister who has done absolutely nothing up to this point to get this thing built. This thing should have been under construction already. It's on this government's watch. It's this government that has to bear responsibility for the fact that this project is not already under construction.
Statements by members. Déclaration de député. L'honorable député de La Pointe.
The honourable member for La Pointe-Julienne. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to speak on behalf of the Bloc Québécois on the subject of Black History Month. The people of Quebec have taken part in great numbers in the festivities everywhere in Quebec, especially in Montreal, Gatineau, and in Quebec City. Music, theatre, dance, exhibitions, and also conferences and panels. There have been many opportunities to underscore the talent and contributions of the Black community in Quebec. We are learning and continuing to learn about their history and of all they have given Quebec. This month is a month when we can celebrate the 4 centuries they have been helping to build Quebec. And we hope that they will continue to enrich us in what distinguishes us.
Mr. Speaker, I stand in the House today to recognize a true example of community spirit and volunteerism at its finest. Within my riding and in my hometown of Centerville, Wareham Trinity, an annual winter festival is held. Invites are extended to people from neighboring small towns and communities to participate in a week of fun. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say this festival is celebrating its 25th year and brings a sense of togetherness like no other, including our senior population who truly enjoy all the social activities this festival offers. To host and manage this event requires a tremendous amount of work. However, each year, 30 to 40 people come forward to volunteer their time, some since the very beginning, in making this festival a huge success. Mr. Speaker, I am truly proud to stand today as a Member of Parliament and commend these amazing volunteers for their effort and commitment.
Arnia Lampton.
As Valentine's Day approaches, people are thinking about their hearts. And February 14th is Congenital Heart Awareness Day in Canada, and part of Congenital Heart Awareness Week from February 7th to 14th. In Canada, 1 in every 100 babies is born with some form of CHD, making it the #1 birth defect. These range from minor heart murmurs to complex structural anomalies. Sadly, there's no cure. Years ago, CHD meant that children had only a 20% chance of reaching adulthood. However, today, virtually 95% of CHD children live well into adulthood due to tremendous advances in medical and surgical care and treatments. I stand to support the Canadian Congenital Heart Alliance as the only national organization supporting children and adults living with CHD. They aim to improve the health outcomes and quality of life for individuals with congenital heart diseases. We salute their wonderful work and the dedication of their volunteers. Happy Congenital Heart Awareness Day.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I recently participated in the first ever PIO Parliamentarian Conference hosted by Government of India in New Delhi. This was attended by over 130 parliamentarians and mayors of the Indian diaspora worldwide from 23 nations. At the conference, I was elated to witness our Prime Minister's lead toward gender reforms, global collaboration, and a strengthening of diversity being taken seriously. Mr. Speaker, we celebrate February as a Black History Month, and this is the kind of diversity that makes our Canada strong. There is an anticipated excitement in store for our Prime Minister's upcoming visit to India. Let's continue to build the global family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here. Honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, proposed changes to pensions in Bill C-27 have constituents in my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam and Morin-Belcarra worried about their future. This bill would allow defined benefit plans to be converted to unsecure targeted benefit plans, placing all the financial risk on workers. Mr. Speaker, this is short-sighted, ill-advised, and unfair. Pensions are deferred wages, and they belong to the workers who earned them. After working all their lives, sacrificing pay and benefit improvements to secure a reliable pension plan, Canadians deserve a fair, decent pension they can count on. New Democrats strongly oppose Bill C-27 and ask that it be withdrawn immediately. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, like many members in this House, in 2017 I had the opportunity to honour notable constituents in my riding with a Canada 150 pin made from the old copper roofs from these very Parliament buildings. I used the opportunity to highlight 20 incredible individuals through my Canada 150 Community Leaders Award. This award recognised community leaders and volunteers that have made positive contributions throughout the riding of Avalon. Our towns are better for having these people in them. Reverend Sam Butler, Ross Petton, Val Green, Major Lauren Pritchett, Sheila Lee, Rita Pennell, Vince Burton, David Fagan, Paddy Corcoran, Angela Woodford, Marjorie Gibbons, Trudy Strobridge, Patricia Hines-Coates, Wayne Power, Dan Sward, Elizabeth Malloy, Kelly Power, Harbour Grace Ocean Enterprises, and the Conception Bay South Monument to Banner Committee. To each and every one of you, I say thank you on behalf of all the people of Avalon. You have all made lasting impacts on the lives of those in your communities, and it is my honour to recognise your contributions to this award. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
The honourable member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, we all know the Prime Minister said he admires the basic dictatorship of China. We now understand some of what he means. This past Friday, applications closed for the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and in my riding of Oshawa, the number of applicants is down by about half. This means fewer jobs for students at UOIT, Trent University, and Durham College. It means fewer summer camp options for parents already struggling to make ends meet. All of this is happening because of the Liberals' new values test, a test to their values or be punished. If you don't agree with the ideological positions of the Liberal Party, your organization will no longer be eligible to receive fundings for a summer student. Simple as that. One organization in my riding wrote to me saying we are desperately concerned that this government overreach is just a test run for a more insidious plan. Mr. Speaker, this values test has no place in Canada, and while the Prime Minister talks a lot about respecting diversity, his actions tell a very different story.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Mr. Speaker, in Pyeongchang early this morning, one of our fine Canadian athletes distinguished himself by winning the gold medal in his discipline, freestyle skiing. I'd like to congratulate all athletes at the Games and those who have already won 7 medals for Canada. I'd like to offer my sincere congratulations to Michael Kingsbury for this signal feat, which makes us all proud. His humility, simplicity, and sportsmanship make him an exceptional example for all the young people in Canada. I'd also like to congratulate his family, friends, and coaches who have been supporting him day after day in helping him to accomplish his medal. Michael, the town of De Montagne, the Laurentians, and all of Canada are proud of you. We're all behind you. We're proud of our Canadian Olympic athletes, and Michael, once again, congratulations for an exceptional performance.
L'honorable député de Sackville-Preston-Chesapeake.
The honourable member.
Parliament for Sackville-Preston-Chesapeake, which includes, of course, the largest and oldest black community in Canada. The culture and the history of African Nova Scotian is preserved and celebrated throughout my riding as well as across Nova Scotia and Canada. And I'm proud also to mention that the Black Culture Centre in Preston is the largest Black Cultural Centre in Canada as well. This year the theme for the Black History Month is Canadian Women and Black Canadian Women, Stories and Strength and Culture and Vision. Like many Nova Scotian, I was inspired by the story of Viola Desmond, and I happened to meet her sister, Wanda Robson, shortly after our government announced that Viola Desmond would be the first black Canadian woman to be in a $10 bill. So every time we use that $10 bill, please remind yourself of her leadership and inspiration. So I wish to wish everybody a happy Black Cultural Week in Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-330 would require landlords' consent before medical marijuana plants can be grown on their property. Under the existing regulations, a tenant with a medical marijuana license can legally grow plants without notifying their landlord. Compare this with the new recreational rules where provinces are recognizing that there's harm or potential harm, and places like British Columbia are going to require landlords' consent. However, this principle does not apply to medical marijuana users. There's no mechanisms for landlords to prevent grow-ups for medical purposes on their province. And unlike the 4-plant limit for recreational use, in some cases, for example, you could have 3 or 4 people living together and they may be authorized to grow 40 plants or more in a house. I've had many property owners who have invested their life savings into rental property contact me because their property was destroyed by such a grow-up. This is simply wrong, and I certainly urge all members to support my private member's bill when it comes up.
The Honourable Member for Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. Mr. Speaker, for the 12th year in a row we are observing Stay in School Day, and this Quebec-wide. From the 12th to the 16th of February, this initiative brings together various stakeholders in order to make citizens aware of the importance of staying in school, of striving, and we also highlight the harm in dropping out of school and highlight the benefits of a diploma. Mr. Speaker, I taught for many years, and I completely support this initiative. I encourage all people in Laval, as well as those throughout the province, to take part in the various activities. There's no such thing as an initiative that's too small. Every action counts. And together, we should all put our shoulder to the wheel in order to ensure the success of our young people and to encourage them to stay in school. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker.
Homage to Miss Elizabeth Ann Williams, who for over 25 years has been volunteering with the West Island Black Community Association. WIPCA, as it's known, is a wonderful organization that provides programs, workshops, and social activities for all in the region. And she cemented her place in the organization in May of 2014 by becoming its president.
In recognition of her contribution, Ms. Williams was named City Builder 2017 by the Municipality of Montreal.
The leadership of another lady, the young and dynamic Kemba Mitchell. And I'm certain the organization will continue to prosper and flourish under her leadership. To all Black women who have worked tirelessly to make a difference in our communities, I say, we see you, we hear your voice, and we thank you.
Honourable Member for Brantford-Brant.
Mr. Speaker, it's highly unusual for a Tory to stand in this House and heap praise on a Grit, but today I must. This spring, after 18 years of serving Brantford-Brant as MPP and Speaker of the Ontario Legislature, Dave Levac is retiring from political life. Dave and I share many things in common: our age, 63, our alma mater, Wilfrid Laurier University, where we both played varsity sports and enjoyed our university years together, our love, and most importantly, for our community, our joint resolve to rise above partisanship and working for the good of our community. The spirit of cooperation comes naturally to Dave. He is larger than life, a big man with a big smile, a really big mustache, and an even bigger heart. I'm proud to have been able to work with him through all these years and to call him one of my best friends. On behalf of the people of Brantford-Brant, there's only one thing left to say. Thank you, Dave.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, last week I went to Washington to talk to the teams of Vermont Senators Patrick Leahy and Bernie Sanders, as well as the American Secretary of the International Joint Commission. I also talked to people at the embassies of Canada in the United States. These strategic meetings, mainly concerning the quality of water in Lake Champlain and Memphremagog, were water shared by Quebec and Vermont. We also talked about economic issues, trade, and border security. I'd also like to thank Mr. Jacques Landry, the mayor of Venise in Quebec, a town that borders on Lac Champlain, who was with me on the mission and who helped me make our case with American authorities. We share two extraordinary lakes. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. As we celebrate Agriculture Day, it's an honour for me to rise in the House to pay tribute to Mr. Hermel Giard, a great farmer who died a few days ago, a man who raised Holstein cows, a breed which he was very fond of. His family was involved in the Saint-Hyacinthe exhibition, and this since its inception and without interruption for 180 years. Mr. Giard was a man who was truly engaged in the world of agriculture and his region. He was devoted to his community and was also mayor of Saint-Simon for almost 15 years. He and his wife, Madame Huguette, were recognized by dozens of distinctions and also entered the Agriculture Hall of Fame. He was someone who truly represented the region of Saint-Hyacinthe. With his leadership, wisdom, probity, Mr. Hermel Giard is a model for the next generations of farmers and his descendants who will be in agriculture for generations to come.
Or Bruce Gray, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, the 2018 Winter Olympics are now in full swing, and unsurprisingly, Canadian athletes have been winning medals left, right, and centre at these games. As of this morning, Canada was only one medal behind Norway for most medals won so far at these games. We will all be watching and cheering on our athletes throughout the games. This week also marks an incredible milestone for my friend and colleague, Senator Nancy Green Rain. 50 years ago, on February 15, 1968, Canadians watched as Senator Green Rain raced down the slopes in Grenoble, France to win gold in the women's giant slalom alpine skiing event. It was an incredible victory and a moment that many Canadians remember to this date. She also won silver in the slalom. As the 2018 Winter Olympics continue, I am looking forward to seeing more and more medals come home to Canada. From hockey to skiing to figure skating and more, I am sure that Canada will own the podium in Pyeongchang. Go, Canada, go. Yeah.
Honourable Member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, scientists around the world marked the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. That is why today I would like to recognize the good work of Let's Talk Science, a national organization in my riding of London West. Let's Talk Science gives youth the opportunity to see into the lives of real Canadians working in science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM. They have 3,500 student volunteers at 45 universities and colleges across Canada, and over 60% of them are women. These young women work to actively make a difference as role models across the country. Let's Talk Science works hard to engage and empower women and girls in the STEM fields, and I commend their work as they continue to inspire the next generation of female scientists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, questions orales. The member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister interrupted a woman at a town hall correcting her use of mankind with peoplekind, his mansplaining went viral. Around the world, the Prime Minister was mocked for his political correctness. Now, the Prime Minister eventually conceded that it was a dumb joke, but his principal secretary, Gerald Butts, tweeted that any and all who criticized his boss were Nazis. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister once said that any statement by Mr. Butts could be considered his own. And in this case?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear a question in that statement.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Yes. Does he think everyone's
Mr. Speaker, the Nazis killed 6 million Jews. People who laugh at the Prime Minister are not Nazis. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister disassociate himself from his principal secretary's unacceptable language?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we, as all of us do, take very seriously the Holocaust and make sure we remind ourselves never again by telling the story of the Holocaust and not relating that to anything else that happened. We recognize that this is something of extreme difficulty and care that we must be taken, and I have always ensured that we are respectful in our discourse, particularly around that subject.
Lord.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, the question was a simple one. We were asking for an apology because of the words of his main advisor. This is a total lack of respect to the House. The next question we would like to ask has to do with the Trans Mountain project, which will create thousands of jobs and benefit the entire country's regions. While the Prime Minister was touring the United States, things were deteriorating between Alberta and BC. We'd like to know if the Prime Minister is finally going to show some leadership and ensure that this problem is resolved once and for all. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have said very clearly that the Trans Mountain project is in the national interest. That is why we are going to make sure that it is built. We know that we must protect the environment, we need to invest in our oceans, and we also must be able to access new markets for our natural resources, and that is exactly what we are doing. We will always work to unite the different parts of our country, and we will always defend the national interest for all Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, clearly people who make fun of the Prime Minister making up words that do not exist are not Nazis.
Hear, hear.
Will the Prime Minister condemn and apologize for the comments of his principal secretary?
Hear, hear. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take very seriously the importance of creating open opportunities for dialogue, and that's why I was so pleased to get out there and do town halls across the country where I took a broad range of questions for Canadians in a very honest and open environment. That is something that I continue to believe in. We will have difficult conversations from time to time, and I will continue to do exactly that in the future.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, quite obviously, the most powerful staff member to the most powerful politician in Canada should not be calling people Nazis. Will the Prime Minister condemn and apologize for the comments of his principal secretary?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to civil discourse, when it comes to the kinds of back and forth that happens in this House, it's a real shame to see the Conservatives using lines straight out of Rebel magazine and Rebel webcast. The Rebel should not be writing commentary and questions for the members opposite. They should know to disassociate themselves from that kind of politics and those kinds of personal attacks.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski, Neja, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Mr. Speaker, $47.8 billion is the amount of uncollected income tax and taxes missing from Ottawa's coffers. And I say missing because that's an evaluation of the Conference Board of Canada. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has wanted to conduct an in-depth analysis of this tax gap since December 2012. 62 months later, they're still spinning their wheels. The Canada Revenue Agency has refused to give the Parliamentary Budget Officer the data his office requested, even if they are anonymized. Will the Prime Minister ask the Minister of Revenue to cooperate with the PBO, or will he wait to be dragged before the courts? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud to be on this side of the House where we support the work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. We have given him more capacity and authority to do his good work. What we have always reinforced is the work that he can do with the data. When it comes to the data from the Canada Revenue Agency, an agreement has been concluded with the PBO and will provide this data in a way that will ensure the protection of personal information of Canadians by the end of the month. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neige-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. That doesn't solve the basic problem, because when we talk about the Canada Revenue Agency, we're talking about an institutionalized culture of secrecy. There's a difference of opinion on Section 241 of the Income Tax Act. When we ask questions about the lack of effectiveness of the agency in the Panama Papers or its communications with KPMG, information is still denied to us. And now the PBO was in conflict trying to get to anonymized data. Will the Prime Minister put himself on the side of the PBO or on the side of unaccountable leaders? Mr. Speaker, I am glad that we've reinforced the role, the authority of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who plays an essential role in our system. We are always happy to support him. I am also happy to be able to say again that the Canada Revenue Agency and the Parliamentary Budget Officer have concluded an agreement that will allow the Parliamentary Budget Officer to do the work that it has wanted to do for some time.
James Bay.
Speaker, our thoughts today are with the family of Colton Boushie, and it is incumbent upon us to say that this Canada will not be a nation where the senseless killing of Indigenous youth is considered okay. The Canada will not be a nation defined by racial suspicion, a failed judicial process, or 150 years of broken promises. But platitudes are not enough. To the Prime Minister, what steps will he take to reassure the Boushie family and Indigenous youth across this country that justice will be made real for Colton Boushie?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our thoughts, of course, are with the family and friends of Colton Boushie. While it would be completely inappropriate to comment on the specifics of this case, we understand that there are systemic issues in our criminal justice system that we must address. We are committed to broad-based reform to address these issues. As a country, we must and we can do better. Our government is committed to working hard every day to ensure justice for all Canadians.
Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Well, Mr. Speaker, speaking about specifics, when the justice system fails an individual, there's appeals, there's legal precedent. But when justice fails a people, it is incumbent upon leaders to take a stand. Because let's be clear, this system didn't just fail Colton Boushie. This system has failed Indigenous people all the way back to Poundmaker, and it has to stop. So in this watershed moment, to the Prime Minister, what concrete steps will he take to deal with the huge legal inequities that are faced by Indigenous people all across this country?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we agree. When Indigenous adults make up 3% of our population, but 26% of our incarcerated population, there is a problem. When Indigenous Canadians are significantly underrepresented on juries and in jury selection pools, we have a problem. We have much we need to do together to fix this system in the spirit of reconciliation. That's exactly what we're going to be doing.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, thousands of jobs are currently at risk because of the lack of leadership from the Prime Minister and his Liberal government. The Trans Mountain project, worth $7.4 billion, which was approved, is now at risk. The Prime Minister does not seem to recognize the urgency of the situation as in inaction, and his silence is putting the Canadian economy, as well as all the provinces and the jobs for Canadian families, in peril. Can the Prime Minister tell Canadians what he plans to do to solve the problem that we are now experiencing between Alberta and British Columbia? The Minister of Natural Resources.
Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline, because it was in the natural interest, because of the many thousands of jobs that would be created, because of the expansion of export markets, so that we wouldn't have to rely on 99% of those exports going to one country, the United States, because of the $1.5 billion we invested in the Ocean Protection Plan, which is world-leading, and because of the consultation with Indigenous communities, which are the three pillars of responsible development.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, last Friday, the official opposition requested an emergency debate to defend workers in British Columbia, Alberta, and all over Canada. The request was refused. And yet, the natural resources industry is a pillar of our economy, and the jobs of thousands of families depend on it. The question is a simple one. When will the Prime Minister finally shoulder his responsibilities, get to work, and show some leadership in this matter in order to protect our natural resources economy? The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Said unequivocally many times that this pipeline will be built, and that no province has the authority to impinge on federal jurisdiction in the national interest. There is only one government in Canada that speaks on behalf of Canada, and that is the Government of Canada, which it has done and it will continue to do.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has completely failed to ensure that Trans Mountain will even get started. As per usual, he and the Liberals are full of empty words, but very empty on action. The Prime Minister has done absolutely nothing to guarantee that Trans Mountain gets built, and the lack of leadership from this government is threatening jobs and interprovincial relationships, Mr. Speaker. What is the Prime Minister going to do to ensure that construction on this pipeline begins this spring?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Speaker, the honourable member knows that the Government of Canada has already intervened in a motion in front of the National Energy Board and agreed with Kinder Morgan that there ought to be a standing panel that is established to ensure that there are no unnecessary delays in a project that we, and I know the opposition agrees with us, is in the national interest. We have been unequivocal in our support. We have taken steps supporting interventions at the National Energy Board, and will be very alert to any other attempts to unnecessarily delay this project in Canada's interests.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Speaker, it's been 440 days since Trans Mountain was approved, and 440 days later, not even a shovel in the ground. Right. A trade war is starting between Alberta and BC, and each day that goes by, that tension is escalating. And while all this is happening, where's the Prime Minister? Well, he's missing in action. His own personal gain and vanity tour seems to trump the work that he should be doing here at home. So once again, Mr. Speaker, what is the Prime Minister's plan to get Trans Mountain started this spring?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
The government has no interest in inflaming emotions between regions of our country, between sectors, from one province to another. The job of the Government of Canada is to speak on behalf of all Canadians. And if the member opposite and members of the Conservative Party expect that we are going to play a game of trying to enrage and inflame regional tensions, we won't do it.
Order. Order. The honourable member for Lakeland.
It's not a game, they just have to do their jobs. And with the Prime Minister finally back from his vanity tour in the U.S., he should finally lead on Trans Mountain and outline his plan for action. But he's still keeping Canadians in the dark. There's not even a glimmer of a plan. And without one, the interprovincial trade war gets worse. Every day, Canadians and small businesses are caught in the crossfire. It's the same empty rhetoric that someday, somehow, this pipeline will magically get built. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity and finally announce the date when Trans Mountain construction will start?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Was the town hall in Edmonton in the dark? I think there were cameras there were microphones there, people were taking pictures of it, they were recording what the Prime Minister said, which was this pipeline will be built. This has been unequivocal. We have intervened at the National Energy Board when there have been attempts made to slow the process down. We understand that this is a project that's going to create jobs, expand export markets, invest heavily in ocean protection with the partnership of Indigenous people. This is responsible national policy.
The honourable member for honourable member for Lakeland.
Prime Minister is still sitting down and won't step in to ensure this pipeline gets built. Without a real concrete plan, his words and the minister's words are meaningless. Clearly, this government's approval, even for a pipeline that is obviously in the national interest, which they've said so over and over themselves, means absolutely nothing. He can't just wish the pipeline into existence. The Prime Minister has to actually get involved and tell Canadians what he's going to do. Wishful thinking and sunny ways don't build pipelines. Why does the Prime Minister refuse refuse to make it clear to Canadians when Trans Mountain is going to get built.
The Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, why does the honourable member refuse to hear what the Prime Minister has said? Over and over again. And he has said, and we have said continuously, that we will not allow any province to impinge on the federal government's jurisdiction over the national interest. It's not profitable for us to deal in hypotheticals of what a government might do. We will act when a government acts, and we will act for all Canadians, not one region, not one sector, not one province.
Honourable member for Desnethi, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by paying my respects to the Boucher family who are here in Ottawa today. They are here because they recognize that our system is broken. And in order for the system to work, jury members must be reflective of all communities. In far too many instances, like the trial that followed the tragic death of Colton Boucher in my home province, that is not the case. What is this government doing to address the underrepresentation of Indigenous peoples on Canadian jurors?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question, and I would echo her sentiments to the Boucher family in their time of grief, and recognize that we as a country have to do more in terms of the criminal justice system, the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples, Black Canadians, and other marginalized individuals within the system. In terms of the underrepresentation of Indigenous peoples on juries, this is something that I have had conversations about with my colleagues across the way. We'll continue to have these conversations, benefiting from former Supreme Court of Canada justices who have weighed in on this issue.
The honourable member for Victoria.
For the system to be fair, jury members need to reflect the community where the alleged crime occurs. But in far too many instances, Mr. Speaker, that's just not the case. And the use of peremptory challenges means lawyers can reject jurors for no reason at all. Maybe they don't like the way they look. Maybe it's the color of their skin. As a first step to ensure real community representation, especially following the tragic death of Colton Boucher, will the minister review and possibly revoke the use of peremptory challenges under the Criminal Code?
The Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, first off, we are undertaking a broad-based review of the criminal justice system. I look forward to bringing forward in the near future reforms. We have worked very diligently with members throughout this House. And to the member's specific question, we are looking at peremptory challenges. We are going to consider how we can utilize the expertise that exists in this room and across the country about how we can substantively improve the criminal justice system and the jury selection process. I know that the member is an active participant on the committee, and we will be engaging with the committee on this.
The honourable member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Minister for the Environment tabled a bill on the environment and sustainable development. After being elected with promises to environmental groups and 28 months in power, this Liberal government has produced very little, Mr. Speaker. This is just window dressing. They have set up deadlines, requested scientific reviews, but the minister retains all decision-making power. How can we ensure sustainable development in harmony with economic development? Why all the fuss? Can we put effective measures in place to protect our resources and develop them intelligently, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for the Environment. Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure the member opposite that we have protections in place. We know that in the 21st century, we must do better. The former government attacked the environmental protection system, attacked protections for our fish and our navigable waters. We have rebuilt them. We have started to do much better because we need the trust of Canadians in our system.
For Dauphin Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' proposed changes to the Environmental Assessment Act will saddle job-creating resource development projects with unnecessary red tape, bureaucratic hurdles, political interference, and complex processes before these projects can proceed. In fact, the proof is in the pudding. There was a headline last week, Suncor to shun major new projects amid Canada's difficult regulatory environment. The Liberals fail to understand that energy projects in Canada are designed with the best environmental standards. Why is this Liberal government continuing to jeopardize the livelihoods of thousands of Canadians and hundreds of communities that rely on our natural resources?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason that we have brought forward new legislation is to rebuild trust in our environmental assessment process. If you don't have the trust of Canadians, if you aren't making decisions based on science, if you aren't listening to Indigenous peoples, then you aren't going to get good projects built. Proof is in the pudding with the party opposite. They couldn't get projects built. That we have a system that rebuilds trust, that has tighter timelines, and is going to make sure that we protect our environment while ensuring good projects go ahead.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Speaker, let me quote the Canadian Environmental Law Association, her friends. Quote, the new process will not restore public trust or ensure credible, participatory, and science-based decision-making, end quote. That comes from her friends. The minister has the power to kill a project without a scientific review. The bill is riddled with red tape, delays, and new criteria that signal the death knell of resource development in Canada. Why is the minister so disrespectful of our natural resource industry?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we spent 14 months listening to energy companies, to environmentalists, to Indigenous peoples, to provinces, to scientists. Why? Because the trust of Canadians was lost by the previous government. They destroyed the trust of the environmental assessment system. They did not make decisions based on science. They politicized everything. We are rebuilding trust. I'm extremely proud that we are delivering on a promise we made to Canadians.
Hear, hear. Order. The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Speaker, that is patently false. The minister claims the new environment and assessment process will be a more efficient, transparent, and predictable environmental review process. Nothing could be further from the truth. The bill is riddled with powers for the minister to halt, delay, and terminate projects on a political whim. The real intent of this bill is to give the minister a veto over resource development in Canada. So why is the minister so intent on suffocating our natural resource industry? Why?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I was very pleased by the response of so many businesses. They recognize that our system is actually more efficient. Unfortunately, maybe the member opposite hasn't read the legislation, but the proposed legislation ensures that there's a more timely process, that timelines are shorter, that transparency that was lost by the previous government is reinstated, that we'll be making decisions based on science. I could go on and on, but good news, we are going to do a lot better.
Hear, hear. Order. The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, this Thursday, veterans will gather in Ottawa for the Left in the Cold protest to raise awareness about growing levels of homelessness among Canada's veterans. And down the street, Trevor Sanderson and Dick Groot, who drove all the way from Winnipeg, are protesting by sleeping outside in the freezing cold. In testimony at committee, the co-founder of Vets Canada said the number of homeless veterans is 5,000. Our veterans risked everything for this country, and the Liberals promised they would honour their sacred obligation. So when will they? And when will they tackle the issue of rising homelessness among our veterans?
Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
And I thank the honourable member for his question. Veterans' homelessness is unacceptable, which is why we have identified it as a priority of this government. Our government is investing $2.2 billion over 10 years to tackle homelessness through a redesigned and expanded federal homelessness program, complemented by NHS initiatives, including the National Housing Co-Investment Fund and the Canada Housing Benefit, as well as VAC initiatives like the $4 million investment in Veterans Emergency Fund, providing immediate and flexible financial support for those veterans in crisis. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, many employees are now refusing promotions and avoiding taking parental leave because they're afraid that they won't get paid because of the Phoenix system. For 2 years, things have been getting worse, but this government just keeps telling us about their many priorities. Today, they'll say that promotions and parental leave are a priority. Well, that's true. But the real priority should be making sure that all public servants are paid what they're owed on time. When will that finally happen? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Mr. Speaker, we are very concerned about the uncertainties that the Phoenix system is creating for public service servants. I'm very empathetic, and we are doing everything that we can in terms of fixing the technology, and we are working with unions as well. Rest assured that this is my #1 priority in my job, and this will get done.
Member for Hastings, Lennox, and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, even today there are First Nations children living on reserve in Canada who cannot safely drink, bathe in, or even play in the water that comes out of their taps. This is why we committed to ending long-term drinking water advisories on all public systems on reserve by March 2021. Can the Minister of Indigenous Services please update this House as to the actions being taken to ensure reliable access to clean drinking water on reserves? Thank you.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington for his question. I hope all members in this House will join me in celebrating the fact that today 11 long-term drinking water advisories were lifted in Slate Falls Nation. Some of these advisories had been in place for almost 14 years. I want to particularly thank Chief Crane and her leadership team for their fantastic work on this. This brings the number of long-term drinking water advisories that's been lifted since 2015 to now 52, and we will continue the work to make sure that all long-term drinking water advisories...
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has shown no leadership on interprovincial trade. His government's failure to reach an interprovincial trade deal that actually eliminates trade barriers and their unwillingness to stand up for the constitutional right to free internal trade between provinces puts Canadian businesses at risk. Now provinces have begun blocking the trade of wine, and the problem is escalating. But while the war of the rosés rages on, this Prime Minister and this government does nothing. When will the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs do his job and end the trade war between the provinces?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we strongly advocate for and support free trade amongst the provinces and territories. We want to see goods, services, and investments flow across borders without barriers and impediments. That's why we worked with the provinces, to answer the question more specifically, and we negotiated the first Canadian free trade agreement amongst the provinces and territories. We have mechanisms in place to deal with disputes, and we urge both parties to work together to quickly resolve this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Full member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
That's no answer. It takes 18 months for that provision to be used, and Mr. Speaker, it only gives $10 million. Wineries need the help of this government right now. Mr. Speaker, it's bad for small business, particularly like wineries and restaurants. It's bad for interprovincial relations, and frankly, it's just bad for Canada. And it's happening because this Prime Minister refuses to stand up and tell Canadians what his plan is to get the Trans Mountain Pipeline built. Now, the lack of federal leadership has left Alberta on its own, and now everyone will have to pay the price. When will the Prime Minister act like a Prime Minister and do his job, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Speaker, I don't know why the honourable member won't take yes for an answer. As we have been telling him throughout the last number of minutes, the last number of days, and the last number of months, we want this pipeline built. And we want it built because it creates jobs, it expands export markets, it invests $1.5 billion in an ocean protection plan that's as best as there is in the world, all while we are consulting with Indigenous communities. That's the responsible thing to do. Why can't he take yes for an answer?
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lobinière. Mr. Speaker, to say that the Prime Minister's trip to the Aga Khan's private island was under exceptional circumstances, it would have had to have been in the national interest of the country. The Prime Minister is defending himself by saying that there was no discussion of Canadian government affairs during the trip. Mr. Speaker, why do Canadians have to pay for the Prime Minister's family's private travel? And when will he pay back Canadian taxpayers? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times, the former Commissioner recognized that these expenses were incurred as part of the role of the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. After the tabling of the report, the Prime Minister accepted responsibility, and we accepted the conclusions. Thank you.
Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, when the Health Minister repaid inappropriate expenses, the Prime Minister said, "The situation is a reminder for all of us to be extremely careful about our expenses and about the public trust that we wield." The Trudeau report was clear. The vacation the Prime Minister accepted from a lobbyist was illegal. Last week, the Prime Minister and the entire Liberal caucus voted against accountability when illegal expenses occur. Mr. Speaker, where is the trust? And just how far are these Liberals willing to go to protect their all-you-can-eat buffet of corruption?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Occasions immediately after the report was released, the Prime Minister accepted responsibilities. This government, we accepted its findings. As the ex-commissioner has stated clearly, these are costs that are incurred in the function and the office of the function of the Prime Minister, as was the case for previous Prime Ministers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, the Globe and Mail has uncovered a disturbing trend in the way that the Liberals, like the Conservatives before them, award infrastructure subsidies. Subsidies are granted in Liberal ridings and Liberal ministers' ridings, while once again rural ridings get shafted. And no, Mr. Speaker, public transport is not the only explanation for that discrepancy. Can the government assure us that the selection criteria for Phase 2 will look at the quality of the project, not the party affiliation of the riding?
Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I reject the premise of this question. We put forward a very ambitious infrastructure plan in partnership with provinces, municipalities, and territories. Provinces and municipalities and territories are responsible for the selection of projects, and we work with them to go through a rigorous criteria to approve them. As far as rural communities are concerned, Mr. Speaker, we are the only government that put forward $2 billion dedicated funding for rural communities to meet their needs and build the infrastructure they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, first we had the Prime Minister let them eat cake moment, suggesting Sears retirees could survive on EI and CPP. Now the owner of Sears is blaming his managers for the firm's bankruptcy after he drained over $3.5 billion out of the company. Clearly, neither understands what is at stake. Thousands of Sears retirees have lost their pension, retirement benefits, and are waiting to hear how much of their pensions they are going to lose. When will this government offer Canadians some real hope that this kind of corporate theft will never happen again?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for his question, his advocacy. He knows full well under the CCAA process that Sears went under a restructuring and refinancing process that unfortunately did not work out well. That is why we're working with the families and the workers in the different communities that have been impacted. That is why, as the Prime Minister has said, through Service Canada, we've held sessions. That is why we put forward provisions in the CPP to support workers and their families as well. We'll continue to monitor and assess all other options and find a way to help these workers, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, today veterans are camped out across the street from the Supreme Court to raise awareness for homeless veterans. Yes, the same Supreme Court where veterans are forced to fight this government. While trying to get elected, the Prime Minister promised veterans that they wouldn't need to fight him in court. But now that he's in power, he tells them that they're asking for too much. When will this Prime Minister start keeping his promises to veterans?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have delivered on our promise for a pension for life. It is a plan to ensure that veterans have a full and productive life post-service. It is monthly, it is tax-free, and it is for life. It provides income replacement payable at 90% of a veteran's pre-release salary. It is indexed annually. It is for life. The Conservatives had 10 years to make changes the veterans were asking for. They did nothing. They did nothing but cut budgets, close offices, and ignore them.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, Our veterans who sacrificed their health for the good of their country now feel abandoned and forgotten. The Prime Minister has shown through his words that he would rather appease Islamic terrorists than honor those who gave everything to protect Canada and democracy. The Prime Minister says our veterans are asking for too much, but the truth is that we owe them our freedom, and we owe them respect. Does the Prime Minister know that he owes them an apology, and if so, when will he do it? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the best way to show respect to our veterans are through actions and not just words anymore. As many in this House know, I relish the opportunity to compare the record of this government versus the record of the previous government. But I enjoy talking about examples of how this pension for life will benefit people like a retired aviator with 5 years of service who is 50% disabled, who would receive over $170,000 in pain and suffering compensation alone over her lifetime. We have listened to veterans, and better still, Mr. Speaker, we have acted.
The honourable member for order. Have I mentioned that I think at some point that members are going to hear things they don't like or agree with sometimes and that they shouldn't interrupt? I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that. The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear to Canadians that the Liberal campaign promises to veterans were both empty and misleading. The Prime Minister promised our veterans lifetime pensions. He has failed. He promised no veteran would have to fight their government in court for his or her benefits that they deserve. Right. From a hand on his heart to a blow to theirs. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Prime Minister can please tell Canadians why it is that he's forcing veterans to go to court to get him to keep his promises.
Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Corner Brook, Newfoundland, Sydney, Nova Scotia, Charlottetown, PEI, Thunder Bay, Ontario, Brandon, Manitoba, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Kelowna, Windsor, Prince George, all offices closed by the previous government. All offices reopened by this government. Reopened with a new office in Surrey, with a new mobile office for the Arctic. Don't let anybody tell you different, Mr. Speaker. Those were cuts. Those are offices that were closed that we reopened. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I don't think the honourable member for Durham heard me, perhaps, and I'd ask him not to interrupt when someone else has the floor.
The honourable member for Brossard-Saint-Lambert. Mr. Speaker, in 1975, the UN declared that year the International Year of the Woman, and since then we've celebrated International Women's Day on March 8th. It's become an important day for recognizing the achievements of women and fighting for gender equality.
This House, how we can celebrate Canada's progress towards achieving greater equality for women and people of all genders this coming International Women's Day. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, feminists like the honourable member from Brossard-Saint-Lambert have shaped our country's history, from the early suffragettes to the activists and advocates and leaders of today. We appreciate feminism as a powerful global movement for gender equality that has led to progress for women and people of all genders. This year, the theme for International Women's Day is My Feminism. We invite all Canadians to engage in a conversation about what feminism means to them and join us in celebrating the achievements and contributions of women in Canada and beyond.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-Les Chemin-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, there were more than 20 visits. I'm sorry, the Liberals are making the babies cry. I'm losing my concentration here. Now, there were more than 20 visits made from Liberal ministers to Irving and C-SPAN, but only 2 to the Davie shipyard. So why are they showing contempt to the Davie workers? Because this is the only shipyard that has delivered vessels on time and on budget. So when will the minister keep their promise and finally deliver the Obélix? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. The Davie Shipyard is a major shipyard, and we recognize the expertise of their workers. They did an excellent job delivering the Astérix. Following consultation with industry, the Government of Canada started discussion with the Davie Shipyard about options to meet the needs of the Coast Guard in terms of their interim icebreaker supply. We are at the first phase of that discussion, and we hope to have more information once the discussions are concluded. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the written press is in crisis, and everyone agrees that we need solutions in this year's budget. But in the meantime, Ottawa cut its ad buys for local media and is now giving more than half of its advertising budget to Google, Facebook, and company. And all of this money is leaving the country. Around the world, other governments are supporting their media and ensuring that these web giants pay their taxes. But in Ottawa, we're doing the opposite, investing everything in these titans of the web. Why? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, high-quality media is essential for our democracy, and since we made new investments, our journalists are now working in many communities where there was no coverage before, like in the Îles-de-la-Madeleine and in Southern Ontario. We also have the Canadian Magazine Fund, which we hope will meet the needs of local news, including in the transition to the digital era. We hope that the government will have a targeted approach to helping the press, the written press, and to helping journalistic independence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And volunteers and other organizations in my riding work tirelessly to help people access home care and palliative care. Very difficult for them. But we made great progress in last year's budget in financing home care and palliative care, made great advancements, but there's more to do. And will the Minister of Health tell us what has been done recently to help organizations that provide palliative care and in-home medical care?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my friend and colleague and member from the Cumberland-Colchester riding for his question and his hard work on this matter. As my colleague highlighted, in addition to Canada Health's transfer, our government is providing $6 billion to provinces and territories to support better home care and palliative care services. We were also pleased to support Bill C-277. Earlier today, I was very pleased to announce an additional $6 million in funding to the Pallium Canada to train additional health care providers so that they can provide services to Canadians when at home. Bilateral agreements are in the process of being signed, with already 2 being done and many more to come in the very near future. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
It's a guaranteed applause line there, wasn't it? The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal MP for Richmond Hill thinks that Iran has an elected government. Meanwhile, the government of Iran continues to show its true colors, this week through the murder of imprisoned 63-year-old Iranian-Canadian academic Kaveh Syed Imami, implausibly labeled a suicide by the Iranian authorities. Mr. Speaker, we've heard that a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. So will they denounce the killing of this Canadian and repudiate their failing Iran appeasement policy?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Consular Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Canadian Government and the House of Commons, I want to extend our sympathies to the families of Mr. Syed Imami. We are deeply concerned about the circumstances surrounding his death, and we call on the Iranian government to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation into his death. We, on behalf of the Canadian government, we are asking for answers, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher des Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, as of March 3rd, the 1% will have 2 new places to hide their money: Grenada and Antigua and Barbuda. This means that wealthy people will be benefiting from this system so that they don't have to pay their taxes. They don't have to help fund schools, hospitals, or public services. And Ottawa is complicit in all of this. When will the Liberals finally start working for real people and put an end to these tax havens?
National.
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, fighting tax havens is an important issue for our government. Over the last 2 budgets, our government invested nearly $1 billion so that we can fight tax evasion. Furthermore, we chose to refuse access to the proactive disclosure program for individuals named in information leaks. We believe that these people should face the consequences of the law. Mr. Speaker, We will continue to look into links between Canadian businesses and international schemes, and we will continue to take appropriate measures to make sure people pay their fair share. The Honourable Member for Joliette. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is not catching the fraudsters. The problem is that the government is making these immoral practices legal. In the next few weeks, people will be getting their T4s, and the government will be waiting for their checks. There will be no mercy if you don't pay the $3,000 you owe the federal government. The Minister of Revenue will be after you, and even you, Mr. Speaker. But in the next few weeks, certain wealthy people will be able to hide their money in 2 new tax havens, all with the blessing of the Minister of Finance. When will the government stop giving a free pass to those who don't pay their fair share and finally put an end to this unfairness? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Our government is firmly committed to fighting tax evasion, and we will always do much more than what the Bloc Québécois could do for the regions of Quebec. That's why we invested nearly $1 billion, and the agency is now has the resources necessary to evaluate risks for all big multinationals every year. Every year, we look at all transactions over $10,000 in 4 jurisdictions. And on December 31st, the agency carried out audits of over 9,000 taxpayers laying some charges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. The Government of Canada has recently recognized the importance and potential of the Arctic region, a region that contains my entire riding. I've had numerous conversations with the Minister and have spoken to many of my constituents about the great need for an increased departmental presence in Nunavut. I applaud the Minister's recent announcement to build an inland rescue boat station in my hometown of Rankin Inlet. My question is, will the Minister consider taking further steps to increase and strengthen departmental presence in Nunavut? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes the importance of the Arctic in terms of the opportunities it offers for commercial fishing. Budget 2017 included funding to expand Indigenous commercial fishing programs to Canada's north. This program will be co-designed with Indigenous people from the north, including those in Nunavut. And, Mr. Speaker, I also want to assure the House and my colleague from Nunavut that our government is looking at a way to enhance the decision-making capacity of fisheries and oceans in Canada's north, and I hope to have some good news in the coming weeks in that regard.
I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of His Excellency Mohammed Pervez Malik, Minister of Commerce and Textile of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Tabling of documents. Order. I would ask colleagues to take their conversations into the lobbies, and I'd appreciate it if honourable members could assist me by saying shh. Order. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, I have the honour to table a notice of a Ways and Means motion to implement certain provisions of an act to give effect to the Cree Nation of EU-HG Governance Agreement, to amend the Cree-Naskapi of Quebec Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. Pursuant to Standing Order 83.2, I ask that an order of the day be designated for consideration of this motion.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I have a message from Her Excellency, the Governor General, signed